Hey guys, welcome in this new video. So today I want to show you how to create this scene in Houdini in a fully procedural way. So we don't have any fluid simulation or any kind of simulation for this one. So we have full control of everything for the fluid, for the strawberry, for the tube and so on. So let's dive into Houdini and let's build this one from scratch. So here we are into Houdini. I've created a new blank scene. The first step is to add a new geometry node. So let's do that. You can rename it R&D for examples. And here we can dive inside. And the first step is to import our two geometries. So we have the tube and we have the strawberry. So we can do that with a file node. So here I can start by adding my tube. So I can click on that. I can click on heap and I have my geometry into the geo folder here. So I will use that one. And now I can add a match size node. So here for the match size, I will keep everything by default. I will just click on scale to fit. So in that case, we have a correct size for our tube. And now I can add a null to specify this is the base of our geometry. So here I will rename it something like base geo. Now I can remove the little cap here. So we can see we have this little cap. So let's add a blast node. And with the blast node here, we can remove some parts of our geometry. And in my case, I will remove the caps. So this is this one. So now we have everything except the caps. So now let's add a transform node. And with the transform node, I can place my tube correctly into the 3D scene. So here for the tutorial, I will just copy and paste the value I've used for my own scene, but of course you can place it as you want. And as the setup is fully procedural, you can always change the position of the tube at any time. So here in my case, I will just copy paste the value I've used. So here for the first transform, I will put the rotate here at something like minus 14.3. Here I will change the translate on the y-axis to 0.75. Here I will change the rotate on the y-axis to minus 28.95, something like that. So this is the first transform. Let's add another one. And here for the second transform, I will just change the position just a little bit to make the bottom of the tube here more into the center of the scenes. So I will change the position into the x-axis to something like 0.048, and I will change it to the z-axis to something like minus 0.06. And now I have this result for the tube. So now as we have our tube correctly placed on the 3D scene, we can add our strawberry. So let's add another file node. And in my case, I have a strawberry model into my geo folder here. And this model is coming from CG Trader. So you can go into the CG Trader website and you can check strawberry. So you can find multiple models and you can buy one from here. So here I will add a match size node to place the strawberry into the center of the scenes. And here for the match size node, I will click on scale to fit and I will change the target size. So I will put the value at something like 0.35 for each axis. Now I can add a null to specify this is the base of our strawberry. So we can rename it something like base strawberries. And here we can add a transform node to rotate it at 180 degrees on the x-axis. So here we can change the transform node to 180 into the rotation of the x-axis. And now we can visualize our tube with our strawberry. So we can add a merge and we can plug this one and this one into the merge. And the merge is only for these. So you can rename it something like only for this. So here, make sure you have a correct scale between your fruits and your tube here. So it don't make any sense to get something like this, for example, or like this. So yeah, make sure you have a correct scale between the two elements to get something quite realistic. So maybe we can start the scene by creating a little line into the center of our tube here. So we can create a little line into this center of the tube, but it depends on your own geometry. So for this technique, I've already covered the entire process into a previous tutorial. So I don't want to spend too much time for this one. So the idea is to select two edge loop into the center of the scenes. Then we can separate the loop into curve and we can create a point into the center of our curve. And then we can copy a line into one point and we can use a second point to create a direction for our lines. So let's start by doing that. So we can add a group on our geometry first. So here we can rename it something like center edges, for example. And here we can change the group type from primitive to edges. And here with this little icon, you can select the edge loop. So maybe we can select this one and this one, so it doesn't matter. So we can click on enter to select the group here for the loop. So you can see now we have created one group with two edge loop. So now we can use a node called edge group to curve. And we can select our group created here. So it's called center edge in my case. So now you can see we have these two loops and we can create, for example, a point into the center of this one, copy a line into these points, and we can use a point of the second one to create a direction for our lines. So to do that, let's add a for each connected pieces loop. And here we can plug that into the connectivity node. And here for the loop, we can add an attribute wrangles into the loop. So let's add an attribute wrangles. We can plug that here. So here with the attribute wrangles, the idea is to remove everything on the loop here and create a center point into each individual loops here. So I've already covered the full process of this Vex code in the previous tutorial, so you can check with a link in the descriptions if you want to go a bit deeper for this one. So I will go a bit fast for this specific tutorial because I've already made it in detail in previous one. So let's start by creating a first vector variable, so vector centroid. And this one will be equal to 0 on each axis. Now let's create a variable for each point. So int num points is equal to n points, 0 for the first input. Now let's create our first loop. So here we can add the point position to the centroid. And we can close our first loop. Now we can divide our centroid with our num point variable. So divide equals num points. Now let's remove our primitive, but first let's get the primitive number. So let's add an int num prim, for example, is equal to n prim functions. Now let's create a second loop to remove all our primitive. We can use the remove prim functions. And here we can type 0 for the first input, we can type e, and we can type 0 to remove the points. Now let's add another loop to remove all the points. And we can use the remove point functions. And now let's add a point to the center with the add point functions. And now we can see the result. We have our two center points, and before we have these two edge loop. So now we can add a fuse node. And now let's add a sort node to sort the points based on the y-axis. So here into the sort node, you can select an axis here. So you can also select an attribute if you want. But in our case, we can go with the by y attribute. And here we can click on reverse point sort. So in that case, we have 0 for this one and 1 for the second one. Now let's add an attribute wrangles. And with this attribute wrangles, we can create a direction for the first point. And in that case, we can copy a line into this one, and we can use the second point to create a directions. So let's do that. So let's add an integer for the point 0 and the point 1. So let's add int pt0 is equal to 0, and int pt1 is equal to 1. Now let's create a group for the point 0. So let's use the set point group functions. And here we can type 0. We can type a name for the group. So maybe we can type something like point 0 group. And here we can type pt0 and 1. Now let's get access to the position of each point. So for point 0 and point 1. So to do that, we can create a vector pose. So let's create some vector pose 0 for the first one, for example. And here we can use the point functions. So we can type 0, p for the positions, and we can type pt0 for the point 0. And we can do absolutely the same for the point 1. So let's type vector pose 1 is equal to the point functions, 0 at p for the position attribute, and here we can type pt1. So now let's define a direction. So to do that, we can create another vector, and this one we can rename it something like directions. And here we can just type normalize to normalize our vectors. And here we can type pose 1 minus pose 0. And now we can just create an attribute for our directions. So let's use the set points attribute functions. And here we can type 0 for the first input. We can type normals to create our directions. We can type pt 0 and we can type directions. And here we can type set. So now let's see the result of our normals, and we can see we have a normal attribute for our point 0 pointing into the second point here. So in that case, we can copy a line into this one pointing into the second point here. And in that case, the line will be fully procedural based on our geometry. So now let's remove the point 1. So let's add another attribute wrangles to do that. And here we can type something like int pt1 is equal to 1. And we can remove these points by using the remove point functions. So now let's use the copy to point to copy the line into these points. So you can plug the points into the second input of the copy to point, and here we can add a line. So here for the settings of the line, I will change the length to something like 0.09 in my case, but of course you can change this length based on your geometry. And here I will change the direction from y to z. So I will put 0 into the y-axis and I will put 1 into the z-axis. So I can plug this one into the first input of the copy to point. And now you can see the line is pointing into the second point we have after our loop here. So now let's add a resample node. And here with the resample, I will change the length to something like 0.005 and I will enable my curve view attribute. So here we can visualize our curve view attribute by clicking on the node here, and into the info you can select the curve view attribute. And now we can see we have an attribute on our line going from 0 to 1, and where the color is red here is the value 1 for the curve view attribute. So now we can remove all the points of our line, but we can keep only the points with the value of 1 for the curve view attribute. So to do that, let's add another attribute wrangles. So here for the attribute wrangles, I will use an if condition. So let's type if our curve view attribute is not equal to 1, I can remove all the points. So you can use the remove point functions, and here we can type 0 at ptnum, and we can close that. So now we have only 1 point with the curve view attribute is equal to 1. So now I think it's time to create the second curve for the strawberry, and later we can connect the curve from the strawberry to this one. So let's dive into the second part of the node tree here. So we can select our strawberry models. And now we can create an helix curve. So let's type helix. And here for the settings of the helix, I will change the 8 to 0.15. I will change the turn number to 5. Here for the radius, I will change the start radius to 0.15. Here I will enable my radius ramp. So I will enable my ramp here. So for the first one, I will keep the value at 1. And for the last one here, I will change the value and I will make something like 0.08, something like that. So now we have our helix look like this. So now we can add a race sop node. We can plug our strawberry into the second input, and we can plug the curve into the first input of the ray. And now you can see we have this kind of terrible result. So here into the ray, you can change the method from projected rays to minimum distance. And here you can select your helix, you can select this icon, and here you can just change the position based on your needs. So maybe we can go for something like this. Something like this is cool for our curve. And here with the ray, you can also select the scale. So by default is at 1. So it means the curve will be projected on our models, but of course you can decrease this value if you want to something like 0.5 for example. So maybe in my case I will go for something like 0.75, but I can always tweak this value if needed. So now let's add a smooth node. And here with the smooth node, I will increase the strength from 10 to 200. Now we have something way more smooth. Now we can add a resample node. So with the resample node here, I will change the length to something like 0.005, and I will enable my curve view attribute. So now we can do absolutely the same that we did before with the center line on the tube. So we can copy and paste the attribute wrangles here, and we can make it for the second line. And now we can add another attribute wrangles. We can plug this one into the first input, and we can plug this one into the second input of the attribute wrangles. And here the idea is to connect this curve with this curve. So we can add a merge here to visualize our two curves. So we can select the resamples and we can select this one and we can plug the two into the merge. So the idea is to create a line between these points and these points. So in that case, we can merge these two curves. So to do that, you can use the attribute angles here. And here the first thing to do is to get the position of these points and the position of this point. So to do that, we can create two vector pos. So let's add vector pos 0 is equal to points of the first input. So we can type 0 for the first input, which is that one. And here we can type P for the position attribute, and we can type 0. And now we can do absolutely the same for the second point, which is in the input 2, which is this one. So now let's create another vector pos 1 is equal to points. And this type, we need to type 1 for the second input of the attribute angles. And here we can type P for the position attribute, and we can type 0. Now let's create a new point based on those positions. So let's type something like int pt0 is equal to at points 0 and pos 0. So let's do absolutely the same for the second one. So let's type something like int pt1 is equal to at points. And here we can type 0 and pos 1. So now we can create a primitive between these 2 points. So let's type int prim, for example, is equal to add prim. And here we can type 0 and polyline. So now let's use the add vertex function for the 2 points. So add vertex. For the first one is 0 prim and pt0. And for the second one is absolutely the same, but for pt1. So we can copy this one, Ctrl V to paste it, and we can replace this one with pt1. So now we can see we have created a line between the 2 points, and we have our two curves here. So we have the initial curve into the tube, we have the second curve into the strawberry, and now we have created a curve between these two lines. So it's absolutely what we need. So now we can add a merge node. We can remove this one because it's just for visualizations. So we can select our first line, which is this one. So we can plug the resamples into the merge. We can select the curve we have added in the attribute angles here into the merge. And we can select the second curve, which is a curve for the strawberry, into the merge. So now we can see we have all the curve here. So after that, we can use a fuse. So in that case, it will fuse the point here and the point here. And let's add the polypath node. So the polypath node will create one and single primitive. And now let's add the smooth node. And here for the smooth value, of course, it's up to you, but in my case, I will go for something like 500. And now we have this kind of results. And now we can add an attribute delete. And we can delete our curve view attribute. So here we can select the curve view into the point attribute. And now we can add another resample node. And in that case, we can resample this curve and we can create a new curve view attribute for this entire curve. So here for the resample value, I will use the same value I've used before, so 0.005, and I will enable my curve view attribute. So in that case, I have a new curve view attribute for this one. So now you can see we have this kind of result. So now I can use a point VOP to create some deformation on our curve and get a bit more realistic, a bit more organic result. But for now, I will keep it empty. So let's add a sweep node. So in that case, we can create some geometry based on our lines. So here into the sweep, you can change the surface shape to round tube. And here, of course, you can decrease your radius. So in my case, I will put the value at 0.035. And here I will increase the column number to 24. And here you can just close the tube here because you can see it's open at the top and the bottom of the curve. So you can close it by selecting the single polygon here, and you can enable the scale along the curve. So here you can create your own profile. So in my case, I will go for something like this, like this, like this, like this, and like this. So you can select all the points here and you can make them into B-spline. So now we have this kind of result, but of course I will maybe tweak the curve later. So now we have our sweep, and now we can convert that into VDB. So let's add the VDB from polygons. And here for the VDB from polygons, I will change the voxel size to something like 0.0008. So we have very high-res results. But maybe we can go for subdivide node just before the VDB from polygons. So we have something a bit more smooth here. So in the VDB from polygons, I will keep everything by default here. So if you already see the previous tutorial with this tube, you can remember I have multiple parts on my geometry here. So I can add a blast node. And you can see I have the base and I have an inner part. So here you can click on delete non-selected and you can see I have this inner part. So here the idea is to isolate this part of the models and convert it into VDB here and merge it with the fluid. So in that case, we have one and single geometry with this curve and this inner part of the tube. And I will remove that one from the final render for my tube. So here I can remove these little options and I can add a null here to specify this is my render geometry. So I can rename it something like render geo. And this is the base of the tube without anything. So now we can do absolutely the same, but for the inner part of the tube. So we can copy and paste that. And here we can click on delete non-selected. So now we can rename that one something like inner, for example. And here you can copy that, Control C. You can go something like here, and we can add an object merge. So here you can click on Control V to paste our inner parts right here on the tree. So now we can add a VDB from polygon. So you can just copy and paste this one here. So here we can convert this geometry into VDB, and now we can use the VDB reshape SDF. And here for the VDB reshape SDF, I will keep the operation to delete and I will change the offset to something like 0.5. So now we can use the VDB combine. We can plug this one into the first input and the second one into the second input. And now we can change the operation to SDF unions. So now we can see we have the inner part of the tube and we have the fluid. And in that case, we can create one and single geometry for that. So now let's add a VDB reshape SDF. So here for the VDB reshape SDF, I will keep the value by default for now, but maybe we need to increase the offset or decrease it. It depends on your own geometry. So let's add the VDB smooth SDF. Here for the first VDB smooth, I will change the operation to Gaussians and I will keep the value by default at 4. Now let's add another one, so VDB smooth SDF. For the second one, I will change the operation to mean curvature flow. And here I will change the value to 6. And now let's add another VDB smooth SDF to Gaussians. So I will change the operation of this one to Gaussians. And here for this one, I will change the iteration to something like 10. So now we have something very, very smooth. Now let's add the convert VDB node. And here we can convert this volume back into polygons. So you can change it here from volume to polygons. And now we have this kind of geometry. So now we can add a normal node. We can put the normals on our points and we can change the weighting method by face area here. So we can add a smooth node. We can smooth our normal attributes. So we can put n here and we can increase the strength to something like 75. And here we can add another smooth, but this time for the positions. And here we can put the value at something like 50, for example. So now let's add a null to specify this is the end of our fluid. So we can rename it something like render fluids. So now we can merge everything together to get a little preview of our scene. So we can select the first null, which is a null for the fluid. We can select these nulls for the tube geometry. And we can select this little transform, which is the strawberry object. And we can plug everything into the merge node. And here you can see we have this kind of result, but I think it's a bit too perfect here. So it's not really organic. So yeah, I think it's a bit too perfect. So to avoid this problem, you can use the point VOB here to create some noise on our curve. So before the sweep. So here we can dive into the point VOB to create some noise. But we need to create some noise only on the y-axis. But of course, it depends on your own cases. But in my case, I want to create some noise only on the y-axis. So to do that, you can use the vector to float. And we can plug the position into the vector to float. So in that case, we have access to the three components, x, y, and z. And then we can use the float to vector to merge it into one and singles output here. So we can plug the x value into the x value, and we can plug the z value into the z value. So we don't touch anything for the x and for the z. So we only add some noise on the y positions. So let's add a turbulent noise. Plug the position into the position here. Let's add an add node, and we can plug the Y position into the first input, and we can plug the noise into the second input of the add, and we can plug that into the Y position here. And we can plug the output of the position into this one. So now you can see we have added some noise into the Y positions, but it could be a good idea to control the noise with our curve view attribute. So in that case, we can control where we want to place some noise on our curve. So let's add a bind. Here for the bind, I can keep it on float, and for the name of the attribute is called curve view, because the attribute is created on the resample node here, curve view attribute. So we can use that into our point VOP. Now let's add a ramp parameter. And for the ramp parameter here, we can change it from RGB to spline ramp, and we can add a multiply node. So here we can plug our turbulent noise into the first input, and we can plug the ramp into the second input, and now we can replace the second input of the add here with the output of our multiply. So now we can select our turbulent noise here, and we can create some parameter into the SOP level. So in that case, it avoids getting from SOPs to point VOP each time. So here you can right click, Vex VOPs options, and you can click on create input parameters, which is here. And now you can go back into the SOPs. So you have access to all the settings of the noise here. And now you can just define a ramp where you want to place your noise on the curve. So we can make something like that, and we can move the noise to something like here. And here we want to avoid getting some noise at the beginning of the curve. So we can select this one, and you can make them into monotone cubic to get something a bit more smooth. So now for the settings of the noise, you can select the point VOP here. And in my case, I will change the noise type to simplex noise, but of course you can try different noise type here. For the frequency, I will change it to something like 7. So here we'll put 7 on each axis. And for the offset, you can play with the different value of the offset. Here for the amplitude, I will change the value from 1 to 0.2, and I will decrease the roughness to something like 0.025, to something like that. And now you can play with the offset to find cool pattern for your specific scenes. So I think I will go for something like this, for example. And now let's see the result of the fluid. And maybe we can see the result of everything together with the tube and with the strawberry. Now you can see we have something way more organics and more natural. So this is with the point VOP, and this is without the point VOP. So this is without the point VOP, and it feels way too straight. So I think it's very nice idea to add some noise on the Y position for this specific case. So I have way more clean results and way more natural result. So maybe I can go here after the transform node of the strawberry, and I can add a null, and we can rename it something like strawberry. So we can select this one, Control C, and we can go back here, and we can add an object merge. And here we can click on Control V to import our strawberry at this part of the node tree. And here maybe we can make some VDB operation between the fluid and the strawberry. So here we can convert the strawberry into polygons. So we can copy and paste the VDB from polygon here for our strawberry. So now we have a VDB on our strawberry. Now let's add the VDB combine one more time. And we can maybe plug that here. So we can select the output of the first VDB combine, plug that into the first input of the second one, and plug the strawberry into the second input of the VDB combine. And here into the VDB combine, you can change the operation to SDF difference. And now you can see we have removed the fluid from the strawberry. So in that case, we can avoid getting some intersection between the fluid and the strawberry. And now you can plug that into the VDB reshape. And now you can see the result of our fluids. So now we have this kind of result, and we can see everything together here. So in that case, we don't have any intersection between the fluid and the strawberry. Of course, you can always refine the profile of your fluid here with a sweep. So I think I can go back into my curve, and I can make some little adjustments. So now I have this kind of result, and you can see here it can be very thin. So maybe you can put the VDB reshape just after the VDB combine here. So you can just put that after the VDB reshape. So you can select the VDB reshape, you can plug that into the first input, plug the strawberry into the second input, and plug that here. And now you can make some adjustment into the VDB reshape. So here we can put the delay at something like 2, for example. and I think it's quite perfect here. So now we have everything into our scenes. So we have our fluid, we have our strawberry, and we have our tube. And now we can build the scene and we can make the shading and the lighting of this one. So now let's start by creating our scene for the rendering part. So we can go back into the R&D node here. And we have all the elements with the null here. So we can select the fluid first. So I can Control C, can go back into the object level, Control Shift and V. And it will create an object node with an object merge node pointing into the null I have copied into the R&D node. So I can do the same for my tube and for my strawberry. So I can go back here, and this is the render geo for the tube, Control C. Control Shift and V here, and I can do absolutely the same for my strawberry. So this is the strawberry, Control C and Control Shift and V. Now I have my 3 elements into the scene, so I can disable my R&D node here. And the first step is to add a camera. So let's do that. Let's add a camera. So here for the camera, the first step is to choose the ratio. So I can go into view, and in my case, I will go for something like 4:5 ratio. So here I will change the first resolution for 1080 and the second one for 1350 here. So now I can go into my view and I can change the position of my camera. So I can split the view by 2 here. So I will select this one. So on the left part here, I will select my camera view, and on the right part, I will just change the position of my camera. So here you can select this little icon and you can find a cool position for your own camera. So in my case, I will keep the focal length at 50 for this one. And I can change the transform. So in my case, I will go for something like 17 here. I will change this one to something like 1. And I will change the position on the y-axis to something like minus 0.12, something like that. So I think the result is quite good for the angle view here for the camera. So now I can assign the different material for my different objects. So I've already imported the material for the tube and for the liquid here. So for the tube, it's a texture set I've created in Substance Painter, and for the liquid, it's basic material here. So you can see it's just standard material with Redshift, and here I just changed the transmission to 0.3, and I've enabled the subsurface to 1, and I've changed the scale to 0.05, and I've just changed the color here. And I've decreased the roughness to something very, very shiny, so I put the value at 0.12. So now I can go back into my object level, and I can assign the different materials into the object. So here I can add a material subnode. I can plug the object here into the materials, and for this one, it's the fluid, so I can assign the fluid material I've created into the RSMat object here. And in my case, is called Summer Liquid Pink Sugar. And here I can add a null to specify this is the end of our object, so I can rename it something like render. And now I can copy these two, Control T, and I can go back into my second object, which is the geometry. And here I can just replace the material with a geometry one. So in my case, it's called Summer Pink Sugar. And now I have the material for the strawberry, so I can assign it right now. But I need to create the material into my material network here. So I need to go back here, and I will import the material like I did for these two, because for the strawberry is a model I've bought on CJ Trader, and this is a texture set created in Substance Painter. So as you can see, it's just 4 textures. So we have diffuse, roughness, normals, and 8. And I've just plugged that into the material here, so it's nothing really complicated. So it's just give with the 3D model I've bought. So now I can assign this material for my strawberry. I can go back here, and I can assign the material for this one. So now I need to create a background for the scene, of course. So here you can create a new geometry node. You can dive inside, and here I've just created a grid, basic grid here. So you can see the size is quite huge because we have quite a wide angle for the camera. So here for the grid, I've changed the settings to 8 and 18, and I've increased the rows and the column number here to 100. Then I've added the normal sub node. I've added a bend node to create this kind of studio background effect. And here I've added a transform node to place it correctly into my scene. So I've added a bit of space between the tube and the strawberry and the background here to add a light. Then I've created a material for the background, and I've assigned the material with the material subnode here. I've created a subdivide node to get something a bit more smooth, and I've added this null object to specify this is the end of my background. So here for my background material, I've just created a very basic material, which is that one. And I don't touch anything except the base color here. So I've added this kind of color, which is like dark pink. And I've increased the roughness to 0.8. So this is basically what I did for the background materials. So it's very, very basic. And now we can be focused more into the lighting part. So here I've opened my render view, and we can start by creating the lighting from this. So I can stop this one. And the first thing to do is to add a RS light dome to get a basic lighting on our scenes. So here for the light dome, I can go into light, and here I can import an HDRI textures. So in my case, I will use this one I use all the time. So I can click on accept, and for the saturation, I will put it at 0. I will change the color space to this, and I will disable it from the environment and from the viewports. And here I will change the transform to minus 90 degrees into the y-axis. And here for the light, I will decrease the exposure to minus 1.5, and we can see the result of our first light. So now we can see we have an ambient lighting, but this is quite dark, just a basic lighting to start with. So now the second thing to do is to add some gradient into the background. So you can add a different shape if you want, but in my case, I will go for something circular. So now let's add a new light. So we can type RS light. And in my case, I will go for something quite big. So I will go into light settings. Here I will change the shape to disk, and I will increase the size to something like 4 or maybe 2 here. So I can enable this light only for the background. So I can go into object, click on this icon, and here we can enable the light only for the background, which is this one. So I can click on accept, and here we click on this icon to place it correctly into my scenes. And here I will make it something like that. And I will also change the power of the light, because for now it's very strong. So I will go back into the light here, and I will change the intensity to 2 instead of 100. And here I will change the spread to something like 0.25. And now we can see the result of our light. So we have this kind of result. I think it's quite good. So maybe we can make a slight rotation on the Z-axis, something like this. But it's up to you. You can make it as you want. So I will make it like this. And maybe I will increase the size to 3 or maybe 2.5. And now I can change a bit the position of my light to something like this. Maybe I can increase the spread just a bit to 0.35. And now we have this kind of gradients. And I can change the position maybe on the y-axis. Yes, something like this is quite good. So now we can create some highlights on our tube, our fluid, and our strawberry. So to do that, I can use another RS light dome. So let's type RS dome. So here for this second light, I will use an HDRI map from Grayscale. So here I can go into light. I can import my texture from here. And in my case, I will use this one, which is Pro Studio Metal Volume 2 0.8. So I can click on accept. And here I will keep that one on sRGB, and I will put the saturation to 0. And now I can just increase the exposure to 1, because I think by default the light is very soft. So now I can go into transform node and place it correctly. So in my case, I will change the X rotation to minus 20. I will change the Y rotation to minus 310, and I will change this one to 10. And now let's see the result of our light. So now you can see we have some kind of highlight here, and also into the strawberry and a bit into our fluids. So now we can add another light dome to get some highlight into this part of the tube. So let's do that. Let's add another light dome. And one more time, I will use an HDRI map from Grayscale, and this time is called Pro Studio Metal Volume 2 42. So let's import it by clicking on the light here. And I will select my texture, which is this one. So I can click on accept, and here I will change the color space to sRGB. The saturation, I put it at 0, but it doesn't matter because this light is only black and white. And here I can go into my objects. So I can enable the light for everything except my background. So to do that, you can click on that. And here you can enable the light for everything except for the background. So I can copy the name of my background object. So Control C. And here I can type this space and Control V. So in that case, it will light everything except the background. So now I can go back into the light settings. So here I will keep everything by default. So now I can go into the transform tab. And into the transform tab, I can change the rotation on the y-axis to find a cool position. So in my case, I will put the value at minus 458. And now you can see we have this kind of highlight here. So I can enable only this dome. And you can see we have this kind of light here. So now I can add another light, but this time more as a fill light here for the left part of our scenes. So let's add another RS light. This time I will enable the light for everything except the background like before. So I can select my RS dome here. Into my object tab here, I can select this one. So Control C. I can go back into the light, and into the object I can enable this and paste the value here. So in that case the light will affect everything except the background. So now into the light settings I will decrease the intensity to 10, and here I will keep everything by default except for the shape. I will make it disk, and I will put the value here at 2 so it can be a bit bigger. And here for the contribution I will keep everything by default except for the reflection. I will decrease it to 0.75, but of course it's up to you and it depends on your scenes. So here I can select my light as a camera, so I can select the light called RS Light 2, and I can enable the lock icon here, and I can go for something like this. So I've changed the position of my light, and you can see the light is here and the scene is here. And now you can see the result of the light. So we have a bit more highlight into the left part of our scenes. So now we can add a backlight for our tube, for this part of the tube, because I think for now it's very, very dark. So like before, we can add another light. So we can type RS light one more time. So this light will affect only our tubes. So to do that, you can go into the light settings, into the object, and we can enable the light only for our for this object, which is called Merge Render Geo. So we can select it from the object tab here, Merge Render Geo. So we can click on accept. And here for the light settings, I can go into the first parameter, which is intensity. And here I will decrease it to 3 to get something very soft. And here I will change the shape to disk, and I will change the size to 2 and 3. And here I will just open my contribution, and I will disable the diffuse. So in that case, it will affect everything except the diffuse. So now I can find a cool position for my light. So now you can see the light is here behind our tubes, and you can see we have a cool highlight on the right part of the tube here. So this is for the backlight of the tube. So now we can create a rim light for the strawberry. So to do that, we can create one more light. So here we can just add another light. And here we can enable the light only for the strawberry. So we can go into the object, and we can select our strawberry, which is this one. And here for the light settings, I will add something very, very soft. So I will put the intensity to 1, and here I will change the shape to disk, and I will keep the size to 1 and 1. And here, like before, I will go into contribution, and I will disable the diffuse. So I will put the value at 0 here. And for this light, I will put it into the back of our strawberry. So we can make it maybe something like here. I will change the position on Z, and I will change the rotation on the Y-axis to something like this. Like this. And we can disable all the lights. So you can see the result only of this one, and we can see the preview. So now we can see we have a cool rim light for our strawberry, and maybe we can change the positions on the Y-axis here to something like that, and like that. So yeah, now we have a cool rim light for the strawberry, so we can enable all the other lights. And maybe if you want, you can tweak the intensity of this light, or also you can tweak the spread or the size to get something different in terms of the backlight. So now we can add another light, but this time for the fluid, to get some rim light into the fluid here. So to do that, let's add another RS light. And here we can go into the object tag, and we can select our fluid. So in that case, the light will affect only the fluid. So in my case, it's this one. So I can click on accept, and I can go back into the light panel here to change the parameter. So in my case, I will change the intensity to 0.5 because the light is quite big. So I need to decrease the intensity to get something very soft. And here I will change the size to disk. I will put the value here at 2 and 4, and I will change the spread to 0.75. And like before, I will go into contribution, and I will decrease the diffuse to 0 for this one. So now we can place it correctly into the scenes, and we need to make as a backlight for the fluid. So we can change the position on the Z-axis here, and we can make a rotation on the Y-axis. We can disable all the previous light to get a focus on this one, and we can see the result of our light. So now you can see we have this kind of result. If you want, you can also go into the multiple scattering tab, and you can put it at 0 if you want to get only the reflections. Or if you want, you can make it maybe a bit more light to something like 0.35. So in that case, we have this kind of result, maybe 0.5. So yeah, I think it's good for this one. So now we can enable everything else. So now I think the strawberry is a bit too dark in this part. So I would like to add a bit more light in this left part to get a bit more contrast between the right and the left. So to do that, we can add another light. So let's add another RS light. And this time we need to enable the light only for the strawberry. So we can go into object and select the strawberry render object, which is this one. And here for the settings of the light, I can go into the light panel, and here I will change the intensity to 1. I will change the size to disk, and I will make quite large to get soft shadows. So here I will put the size at 8 and 8. And here for the contributions, I will go into the reflections, and I will decrease it to something like maybe 0.3 to get soft reflection. I don't want to get very harsh reflections on our strawberry. So here I can select the light, which is called RS Light 6 in my case. And here I can select the little icon here to change the position of the light. And we can disable everything one more time to be focused on this one. And we can see the result of the light on our strawberry. So maybe I can go a bit more into the left, into the right. So in that case, we have highlight here and we have good contrast on the right parts. So I think something like this is good. So now we can enable all the previous lights and we can see the results of our lighting. Of course, you can tweak the dome if you want to get something a bit more bright and so on, but I think it's quite good as it is. So don't forget to add a bit of subsurface on the strawberry here. So into the strawberry, I've plugged the diffuse into the MS color and MS radius. So in that case, I can enable the subsurface, but I've put the scale very, very low for the strawberry because I don't want to get very huge amounts of subsurface for this one. So I think it's quite better with this parameter enabled. And yeah, I think it's pretty much it for the lighting and for the shading of these scenes. Of course, you can make it as you want, depending of the result you want to achieve and your own geometry. So now if you are ready, you can go back into the out context here and you can put the camera into your Redshift hub here. So in my case, it's called camera 1. And here you can keep this option on render current frame to create a stills. For the output here, you can render EXR or PNG or JPEG if you want. So in my case, I like to render EXR to make some compositing in After Effects. So I can make that into 32 bits. You can render different paths if you want. So for example, you can add diffuse, specular, reflections, refractions, subsurface, GI. And if you want, you can separate the different elements of the scene to make your advanced compositing in After Effects and separate the different elements to make color correction only for the strawberry, only for the fluid, only for the tube, and so on. So to do that, you can use a puzzle mat. So here you can use puzzle mat, and don't forget to change it from material ID to object ID. And you can put 1, 2, 3, and you have to add another puzzle mat because we have also the background. So let's add another one, and don't forget to change the name here. So this one is called puzzle mat 2 for objects 4, 5, and 6. But in our case, we have only 4 objects, which is background, tube, liquid, and strawberry. So now you can go into Redshift, you can go into advanced, and in my case, I don't like to put automatic sampling. So here you can put the threshold at something like 0.025 for stills, depending on your computer. So here for the minimum, I can put the value at 128, 1024. And if you want, you can override some of the channel, but I think it's quite good as it is. So here we don't need motion blur. We can increase the globals to maybe something like 20, 10, and 10 for reflection and refractions. Here for the GI, we can put it on brute force 1024. And here we can go into systems and we can change the bucket size to something like 412. And now you can click on render to disk to create the final rendering. So that's it for this tutorial, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. See you in the next one. Bye bye.